India's Internet Underwatch. How a new law could change digital freedom forever. Imagine waking up to a world where your private messages are silently monitored, where websites you depend on simply vanish without warning, and where the digital space you've always considered a bastion of free speech has become a battleground for control. For over 1 billion people in India, and millions more around the world who watch from afar, this scenario leapt from dystopian fiction into reality in December 2023, when Parliament passed the new Telecommunications Act. On paper, it read like a long overdue modernization of laws that dated back to British colonial rule. In reality, critics warn, it codified sweeping powers for the state to intercept, surveil, and even shut down internet services on a whim. By the time most users heard about it, key clauses were already in force. But how did a law enacted to simplify and streamline telecom regulations turn into what many digital rights activists call a massive surveillance toolkit? And why should a global audience, outside India's borders, care about one country's law? The answer lies in the fact that India is not merely another internet market. It is the world's second largest online population. Policies that govern the Indian net shape, where billions of dollars of data flow, set precedents for emerging democracies, and ripple into global debates about privacy, free speech, and corporate responsibility. When India experiments with new forms of digital control, the rest of the world takes notice. In this video, we'll peel back the glossy facade of political spin and marketing jargon to reveal what the Telecommunications Act actually does, and what it means for anyone who values an open internet. We'll examine common misconceptions and surface-level narratives, then dive into hidden clauses that grant far-reaching powers to intercept calls, seize data, and shut down services without meaningful judicial oversight. Next, we'll step outside India's borders to see how similar laws have played out in China, Russia, and Iran, showing the real-life costs of unchecked online control. Along the way, we'll walk through personal scenarios, how this law might impact a journalist, a small business owner, a student preparing for exams, or a diaspora family trying to stay connected across continents. We'll hear from digital rights experts, legal scholars, and civil society activists to understand the looming stakes. Finally, we'll outline practical steps each of us can take, whether you're in Mumbai, Manhattan, or Madrid, to push back against creeping digital authoritarianism. By the end of this video, you'll see that the battle for internet freedom isn't a remote issue happening over there. It's an active struggle that affects how we connect with loved ones, share ideas, and hold power to account, no matter where home is. Buckle up. This isn't your typical tech explainer. It's an investigative journey into a law that could reshape the digital world as we know it. What everyone thinks this law is about. When the Telecommunications Act of 2023 was first announced, the public narrative in India, and to some extent in global tech circles, focused on its promise to modernize and simplify decades-old regulations. The Department of Telecommunications, under the Ministry of Communications, emphasized that the act would harmonize disparate laws like the Indian Telegraph Act of 1885, the Wireless Telegraphy Act of 1933, and the Telegraph Wires, Unlawful Traffic Act of 1950 into one unified framework. In press releases, ministers spoke of cutting red tape, streamlining licensing procedures, and preparing India for the next wave of 5G, satellite internet, and Internet of Things, IoT devices. Industry lobby groups such as the Cellular Operators Association of India, COAI, and the Internet Service Providers Association lauded the act's potential to ease spectrum allocation, reduce compliance burdens, and attract foreign investment. Tech blogs highlighted how a consolidated legal code could help startups scale more quickly without navigating multiple outdated statutes. At public town halls and in mainstream media coverage, the act was framed as a win for connectivity. Faster rollout of broadband to rural areas, clearer rules for virtual network operators, and explicit recognition of new services, everything from video streaming platforms to ride-sharing apps, under a unified telecom license. For many urban middle-class consumers, it felt like business as usual. They expected slightly faster approvals for installing small cell towers, smoother processes for obtaining mobile number portability, and perhaps a little more clarity around how telecom tariffs are set. In the words of one telecom executive quoted in the Economic Times, this act paves the way for India to lead in the digital economy. Once implemented, it will reduce compliance costs for operators and bring better services to consumers. Outside India, most tech journalists covered the news as a routine legal update, echoing the government's talking points. International press described it as India's attempt to catch up with regions like Europe, where the e-privacy directive and the General Data Protection Regulation already shape telecom and internet policies under a single umbrella. Even some digital libertarian commentators praised the act for its emphasis on technology neutrality, suggesting that any service delivering bits and bytes, whether a traditional telecom provider or an app-based platform, was treated equally under the new law. In short, the prevailing perception was that India was simply consolidating laws to match global standards. Few realized that tucked inside this consolidation was a suite of powers that would allow authorities to surveil, intercept, and curtail online communication at an unprecedented scale. That's because until you read the fine print, all you see are phrases like exclusive privilege, national security, and public order, words that sound necessary and benign until you discover how broadly they can be applied. In this section, we've outlined the official story, modernizing, streamlining, boosting the digital economy. But as we'll see next, reality diverges sharply from the government's narrative. What the law actually does, behind every statute lies unseen authority, broad, vague definitions. The Act's definitions sound harmless, but grant sweeping control. Telecommunications service is defined as any service that enables transmission, emission, or reception of any signs, signals, writing, images, sounds, or intelligence by wire, optical fiber, radio, or other electromagnetic or electro-optic or photoelectric system. In plain terms, this covers voice calls, SMS, WhatsApp, Signal, Instagram Live, email, and anything that sends data over a network. This catch-all lets regulators treat any internet platform like a legacy telephone service. Public emergency is never defined. The new act retains that vagueness. Anytime the government claims public safety, order, or national interest is at risk, it can invoke draconian powers. Without clear thresholds, almost any situation could qualify as an emergency. Licensing and exclusive privilege. Section 3 grants the government an exclusive privilege to provide, establish, and maintain all telecommunications services. Every provider, traditional telcos, broadband firms, cloud gaming platforms, must secure a central government license. Operating without one can mean criminal charges, massive fines, and equipment confiscation. A small startup streaming videos or collecting IoT data could suddenly be branded illegal if it lacks the proper permit. Regulators can impose terms and conditions on these licenses at any time, without parliamentary debate. They might demand that all user data be stored on Indian soil, require encryption keys, or force installation of government-mandated interception equipment. Because the Act grants near absolute discretion, there's zero transparency on what might be imposed next. Surveillance and interception. Section 4 allows the government to intercept, monitor, or decrypt any information generated, transmitted, received, or stored in any computer resource, whenever it claims public safety and order or national security is at stake. These powers aren't theoretical. Between 2016 and 2022, India led the world in internet shutdowns. Now those powers are baked into a single law, allowing authorities to disrupt any mobile or internet service at will. The Act also forces providers to retain call data records, CDRs, and internet traffic data for at least 7 years. This metadata, numbers dialed, call durations, websites visited, login timestamps, combined with mandatory Aadhaar authentication for SIMs, gives the government a trail linking every message, call, and site visit to an individual. Shutting down the internet. Section 4 lets the government order service providers to cease transmission or suspend service in any area, as far as practicable, under the guise of public safety or emergency. Unlike earlier rules where state governments manage shutdowns, the new act lets the central government step in directly. No independent tribunal or court approval is required, just a non-reviewable executive order. Consider the 18-month blackout in Jammu and Kashmir starting August 2019. Under the old Telegraph Act, it took multiple obscure orders to cut service. Under the new act, similar or longer shutdowns could be enacted far more swiftly and with less public scrutiny. Forcing handovers and backdoors. Section 5 is chilling. The government can compel any provider to decrypt, decode, or provide access to messages and data. There is no explicit carve-out for end-to-end encryption or any other limit. Although tech companies sometimes resist handing over encryption keys, citing user privacy and due process, the Act's language leaves no wiggle room. If authorities issue a lawful direction, providers must comply or face license revocation and colossal fines. In effect, even WhatsApp's end-to-end encryption could be undone, forcing backdoors that compromise user privacy. Penal provisions and enormous fines. Section 6 imposes penalties for violating license conditions, refusing interception directives, or failing to retain data. Companies can face up to 3 years in prison and fines reaching hundreds of crores of rupees. Such draconian punishments intimidate businesses into compliance, often at the cost of user privacy and free expression. In summary, the Telecommunications Act of 2023 isn't just streamlining telecom rules. It embeds a surveillance and censorship framework far deeper than any previous legislation. Its vague terms, public order, public safety, or national interest, create an environment where nearly any dissent, independent journalism, or online gathering could be deemed a security threat. By embedding these hidden powers into law, the Act shifts control firmly into the hands of the state, leaving citizens, startups, and journalists vulnerable. Global comparisons and warnings from history. To fully understand the stakes, it helps to look at precedents in other countries that have implemented similar laws. Each path has yielded predictable results: diminished privacy, curtailed dissent, and emboldened governments. India's new law shares many characteristics with these global examples. China's Great Firewall. China's Great Firewall is the blueprint for state-controlled internet. Starting in the late 1990s, the Chinese government built a vast digital censorship machine, blocking Google, Facebook, and Twitter while promoting homegrown platforms like WeChat, Weibo, and Baidu. Every message, post, and image is scanned for subversive content using deep packet inspection devices, AI-driven filters, and legions of human censors. Even VPNs are regulated. Only government-approved services are legal, ensuring no truly anonymous browsing. The result is a walled garden. Journalists, activists, and ordinary users know that mentioning Tiananmen Square, Tibet, or Xinjiang can mean account bans, detention, or worse. India's new act doesn't yet have China's full tech stack, no nationwide DPI grid or AI censorship network, but its legal framework echoes the same principle. Vague terms like public order give authorities broad license to block or filter content. With the act on the books, building surveillance centers, mandating data retention, or forcing decryption becomes far easier. In a few years, uncensored news sites or private chats could be as unreachable as they are in China. Russia's sovereign internet. In 2019, Russia passed its sovereign internet law, handed Roskomnadzor, the communications regulator, the power to force ISPs to route all traffic through a central filter, deploy DPI gear, and store user data indefinitely. There's also a kill switch to isolate Russia from the global internet to guard against cyber threats. In practice, these tools stifled dissent. During the 2021 protests for Alexei Navalny, Roskomnadzor throttled and blocked social media platforms, hindering organizers. Independent news sites were forced offline, and VPN downloads spiked as Russians tried to stay connected. India's Telecommunications Act doesn't mandate a national kill switch yet, but Section 4's suspend service clause can black out entire regions. Once combined with mandatory data retention and interception infrastructure, the tools for a sovereign internet are nearly in place. History shows that once deployed, such powers rarely retreat, resulting in self-censorship, offline newsrooms, and isolated communities. Iran's National Information Network and shutdowns. Iran's approach centers on a national information network, an intranet for approved websites and apps. During the 2019-2020 protests over gasoline price hikes, authorities ordered near-total internet blackouts, cutting off students, businesses, and families for weeks. VPNs worked only sporadically, and aid organizations struggled to communicate. But it's more than blackouts. Iran demands data localization, forcing companies to store all user data on domestic servers, so security forces can seize it at will. By 2017, researchers noted that Iran's DPI nodes could watch and control almost all traffic. India's Telecom Act already mandates 7 years of metadata retention and Aadhaar-linked SIM authentication. If the government later insists on localized data or DPI devices for security, the seeds for an Iranian-style intranet will be sown, enabling region-wide throttling or content filtering without public oversight. Turkey, Egypt, and other case studies. Turkey and Egypt illustrate how quickly emergency powers become permanent. After the failed 2016 coup, Turkey banned YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook under public safety laws. Journalists were arrested for critical posts, and as of 2022, Turkey ranked second globally for blocking Twitter and YouTube. In Egypt, a 2017 cybercrime law criminalized sharing fake news or materials harmful to national security, triggering widespread self-censorship among citizens and journalists. These examples share a pattern. Vague language, public emergency, national security leads to broad shutdowns, mass data collection, and normalized surveillance. When authorities declare a crisis, protests, elections, health emergencies, the same censorship powers are reactivated, only to linger long after the crisis ends. India's new act follows this roadmap. Ambiguous terms grant sweeping powers, mandatory infrastructure lays the groundwork, and harsh penalties deter dissent. If history is any guide, what starts as temporary could become the new normal, shifting control from citizens to the state, one vague definition at a time. How this could affect you. Under the new act, authorities can instantly cut off mobile data and block websites whenever they claim public safety is at risk, silencing protests, stifling real-time updates, and leaving whole neighborhoods offline without court approval. Encrypted messaging platforms could be forced to hand over decryption keys, making confidential sources vanish and discouraging whistleblowing. Startups may be compelled to store all user data domestically and install government-approved monitoring tools, driving up costs, eroding trust, and pushing innovators toward quieter markets. Even routine video calls to family members or telemedicine appointments can be disrupted during a regional blackout, turning simple conversations into impossible connections and creating real humanitarian risks. In effect, any online gathering, whether for education, journalism, commerce, or personal life, can be throttled or surveilled at will. Vague notions of public order and national interest give regulators carte blanche to suspend services, demand metadata, and impose censorship without transparent oversight. What begins as a so-called temporary measure quickly becomes normalized, eroding digital freedoms and turning the internet into a state-controlled space where every click, call, or message can be monitored, blocked, or wiped out. What the experts are saying. Digital rights NGOs and civil society warnings. The Internet Freedom Foundation, IFF, calls the act a severe threat to free expression and privacy. They argue that broad surveillance powers and data retention rules will chill dissent, journalism, and everyday online life. Small businesses, already stretched, will bear the brunt of compliance costs, data storage, monitoring equipment, silencing grassroots digital entrepreneurs. The Software Freedom Law Center echoes these concerns, warning that retrofitting colonial-era surveillance into modern law turns India's internet into a maze of checkpoints. Forced biometric SIM registration, they say, violates the Supreme Court's 2017 right to privacy ruling. SFLC insists any mass interception must first secure judicial warrants, not just government orders. Legal scholars and constitutional concerns. Constitutional expert Pratap Bhanumehta wrote that vague terms like public order and national interest fail the legal certainty test under Article 14 of India's constitution. He stresses that any law curtailing fundamental rights must be narrowly tailored and subject to judicial review. But this act does neither. Dr. Apar Gupta of the Center for Internet and Society warns that mandatory data retention plus forced decryption paves the way for unchecked state overreach, leaving citizens unable to communicate without fear. He recommends adding explicit encryption safeguards and requiring independent tribunals for any interception. Global observers and technology analysts. Freedom House downgraded India from partly free to not free in its 2024 Freedom on the Net report, citing unprecedented legal frameworks that let authorities routinely restrict online expression and information access. Their analysts note that the act institutionalizes ad hoc powers, making shutdowns and surveillance ordinary instead of exceptional. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFFF, warns that India's shift may influence neighboring democracies in South Asia and Africa. As India exports its telecom models, other countries could mimic these restrictive laws, eroding internet freedom regionally. Industry voices caught in the middle. Major telecom operators, Vodafone Idea and Bharti Airtel, have pledged to follow all lawful directives while stressing their commitment to user privacy. In contrast, smaller ISPs and startups fear they can't afford the required infrastructure upgrades or face crippling fines. An anonymous startup CEO told TechCrunch India that many might simply shut down rather than risk non-compliance. These diverse perspectives highlight a critical theme. India's new Telecom Act isn't a mere regulatory tweak. It sets a powerful precedent that shifts the balance between state control and individual rights in the digital age. If left unchallenged, what begins as temporary restrictions could become permanent, limiting online freedom far beyond India's borders. Why staying silent is not an option. What began as a simple streamlining of telecom laws has become a framework granting near-total power to surveil, censor, and silence digital voices. From forced decryption to indefinite regional blackouts, India's new Telecommunications Act mirrors models like China's Great Firewall and Russia's sovereign internet. If other countries embrace vague terms such as national interest or public order, internet lockdowns and constant monitoring could become routine. In India, these powers may be used during elections, protests, or any inconvenient moment for those in power. When one of the world's largest democracies does this, it normalizes internet repression globally. Yet there's hope. Legal battles in Indian courts challenge these overreaches. Civil society groups and international organizations are pushing for amendments that demand judicial oversight and protect encryption. Tech communities are building tools to bypass blocks and secure private communications. And you can help. Share this video, discuss it with friends, and raise your voice on social media. In the digital age, information is power. Once you see how the Act's hidden powers can be used, you can't ignore it. Ask yourself, how often do you message someone across state lines, join a video call, or read uncensored news without worry? Those freedoms are at risk. Don't stay silent. Talk to peers, support digital rights groups, and use encrypted tools. Write to your representatives, wherever you are, and insist that privacy and free expression are essential foundations of democracy, not optional extras. Thank you for watching. If you found this video helpful, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future in-depth analyses. And share this video to keep the conversation going. The fight for internet freedom doesn't end here. It only begins.